That's right. Welcome in, welcome back, folks, to a Notre Dame fans. What is your Ohio State of Mind edition of the Always Irish Show? As always, you can find that program on YouTube. Do subscribe if you haven't yet. I'd appreciate that very much. Give the video a thumbs up if you approve of the content. I'd appreciate that as well. Twitter, search bar Always Irish, or at Always Irish Inc. Emails, alwaysirishnd@gmail.com. I admit, life's been busy. I'm a little backed up on email responses. I will try and work through them. I apologize. Life's getting busy. Apologize for that. Call-in show, 312-900-8815. Audio only, anywhere you want me. You could get me. Here's the deal. ND Nation, we're here in late May already thinking, talking, tweeting daily about Marcus Freeman, year one, week one, game one at the Ohio State. That always annoys me. The Ohio State. Everything's the, like, I don't get why they're the. There's a million things in America that start with the, and they're the for some reason. I don't get it. Anyways, that was not planned. It's just hitting me that it bugs me. There's a million things in America that start with the. This one's the. You got to say it all different. Anyways, sorry for that rant. There's just so much excitement around the program now. New coach, fresh feel, fresh energy, new vibe. Totally revamped recruiting operation going at higher end talent. Mostly new staff. All of it has added up to where we're talking about this game every day already. We live for this stuff in a regular year where you play nobody week one. Add in the fact that it's not Kelly, but a new coach most of us, if not all of us, like, versus a top 3 program where Marcus played. No wonder everybody's talking about this game all the time. Now, while everybody's thinking about this game, what individuals are thinking about this game, I have learned varies wildly. And that's where I have a question for you. One that I'm personally struggling with. That's one thing I always promise to you guys is being honest. When I have a heavy opinion that isn't going to change, I let you know my reasoning why. One side or the other of the aisle, whatever's the situation is, in my opinion, is I have my reasons. I admit this is one where I'm really struggling with some things and don't know exactly where I fall. And that's what I want to go over with you guys. How are you entering this Ohio State game mentally as a Notre Dame fan? I have heard everything from Marcus was brought here to win games like this. Kelly never could. I expect a win right away. To the flip side, game one, year one, new staff, new quarterback, first time being a full head coach, figuring that all out. Top 3 program at their place with a still Kelly heavy roster. Give him some leeway. Not going to freak out if we lose this ball game, looking at the big picture. Those are the extremes I've seen, and they're vast. Everything from we expect this to be a win right away to a little more leeway and understanding this is the beginning of a retooling, reshaping, rebuilding, restructuring of the program. It might take a little time. Personally, if I had to pick one of these, all in one way, all in on the other way, I'm leaning towards the second option. But I don't think you need to be forced into all one camp, all the other. Follow me here. Why in the world can't you be right in the middle on this? I don't like things where I feel like I'm forced to be all in on one side or all in on the other side, and there's no reasonable middle ground. Speaking of that, it reminds me of what's going on in this country with politics. the media, whatever it is, it feels like you got to be forced 100% on this side or 100% on that side. Nobody seems that interested in reasonable middle ground answers or solutions to problems or perspectives. Everybody wants to clump you in, all in over here, all in over there. Why can't this be right in the middle? I think right in the middle on this is the fairest place to be as a fan and the most level-headed place to be as a fan. Have your hopes that under Freeman, the new energy and the new vibe will be much better than anything Brian Kelly ever put on the field. Maybe we could shock the world week one. If you're going to play a top 3 program and you're not sure if you have full talent that matches up everywhere, get them week one. Think weird stuff happens week one. Teams that are going to end up being very good or a little sloppy, maybe sleepwalk. It's week one. Goofy things happen. That could work against you. It could work for you. So middle ground to me is have hopes that this will all look different. Maybe we shock the world week one when nobody's betting on you. Nobody expects you to win the game. But also, if that doesn't happen and the more established program with more talent in key areas, that's not an opinion. That is a fact, especially offensively, looking at Ohio State's quarterback wide receiver situation, that if this doesn't happen and you don't win that game, have the maturity and patience to understand the team playing Ohio State is not all under Marcus Freeman's head coaching vision and building yet. He doesn't have his guys. And you need to understand that Marcus Freeman's a long-term upside recruiting engine-driven play. And that 6 months isn't long enough time for him to build this program totally in his image with the talent and the shape and the feel and the look he wants. It's just not practically enough time for anybody to flip the roster and staff in the way they want. Nobody could do that. Time doesn't allow for it. So the middle of the road here isn't a cop-out. It's very, very fair. Hope for the best. Excited for the new energy. Catch Ohio State week one. Shock the world. Everybody will hate Notre Dame. Marcus Freeman's already bright star would be on a rocket ship to the moon. All of that. But if it doesn't happen, I will understand why, and that it's going to take a little bit of time. So playing in the middle of the road seems fair to me and logical to me to look at it that way. Here are some objections to my proposed philosophical, emotional, logical position. Number one, if this was Brian Kelly, you would expect the win. You would roast him for a loss. How can you say anything different about this guy? You are correct. If it was Brian Kelly, I'd expect the win and roast him after the guaranteed loss. It would be that we all know it would be if it was Brian Kelly. Guaranteed. Correct. He's been a head coach 45 years, and it would have been 11 or 12 or 13 here. Figure out how to win a big game after all those decades. No one being reasonable can view this the same way with Marcus in charge game one, week one, year one of his head coaching life and expect the same things as a guy who's been doing it 45 years. A dozen here. You cannot view those dynamics under the same light and microscope. You can't. They're just different dynamics. Number two, this one has some nuance to it. Number two, Marcus is, and I hear this all the time. I get tweeted this all the time. Marcus is here to do what Brian Kelly couldn't. Win these types of games. You are 100% correct in the big picture. You are 100% correct in the big picture. If you tell me Marcus is here to flip this roster with the elite recruiting effort, win the games Kelly wasn't winning, that's accurate. But week one, year one, with Brian Kelly's roster, isn't that dynamic? It's not. This is not a fair position to put on Marcus with Brian Kelly's roster. Right? I just, listen. If Brian Kelly's roster was elitely well-rounded when he left with depth and experience at key positions like an elite quarterback, wide receivers out the wazoo, then Brian Kelly left, Marcus Freeman inherited his role, maybe we're having a different discussion. But that's not the shape Brian Kelly left the roster in. So, yeah, Marcus was brought in here to do what Brian Kelly couldn't, win these types of games. I don't remember anybody saying it was going to be the first one right out of the gate, though. When I've said things like that, I'm talking about big picture. I'm talking about what this operation is going to look like after a few recruiting cycles and the roster's flipped to be under Marcus Freeman's vision. That's not what this is week one. So, yeah, big picture. Obviously, it's true. Marcus was brought in here with the intent to do the things Kelly couldn't do. I just think he has to be given time to do it. How is that not logical and fair? Philosophically, think about it. Why didn't Brian Kelly get over the hump at Notre Dame? Large part of it to me is lack of recruiting, developing, finding, lucking into, transfer portaling into, beaming down from Mars. Whatever the reason, Kelly never found elite quarterback play he could rely on when the team needed it the most. Never added at Notre Dame. And lack of overall elite recruiting filling in all the other spots, right? Marcus has inherited both of those issues front and center without even having a full recruiting cycle to address these issues. So remind me again how you could take this position. People were happy to see Kelly go because we were seeing the lack of elite recruiting and how it looks on the field in these problem areas. He's out. Marcus is in. He hasn't had the time it takes anyone to address those issues. So how then do you expect him to magically snap his fingers and our wide receiver room that was barren suddenly looks like USC's overnight? Unrealistic. Not a fair position. It's illogical. It's illogical. If I've said it once, I've said it 200 times already on this program. Nobody can undo 12 years of Brian Kelly's lackadaisical recruiting in one off season. You are lying to yourself if you say that is possible, or you just don't know enough about the dynamic and what it takes to win, what Kelly gave us. You just don't get it. You don't get it. Right? So, if this roster was, in my opinion, playoff game winning ready, elite quarterback play, you could rely on a few NFL receivers, I'm talking about this different, but that's not what's on Marcus's plate week one, year one. And it isn't his fault. Be mature enough to understand that. Kelly isn't here because of these issues. Kelly isn't here because he didn't get over the hump, because he did not a good enough job addressing these issues that are immediately handed off to Marcus as a problem week one, year one. You can't expect the guy to magically wave a wand and those problems disappear one off season. You can't expect that. It ain't fair and it's not physically possible. And if we didn't have these roster issues, Kelly would still be the coach. He'd be recruiting better. We'd get better results. He wouldn't feel like he's reached a ceiling in Notre Dame for whatever reason. He'd still be here. The fact that he's gone shows you there's problems. It's an admission that he couldn't get the roster over the hump. Why is a different discussion. Kelly would have you think it's Notre Dame capping what's possible. I think it's Kelly capping what's possible in terms of Notre Dame recruiting. And what's going on now with recruiting kind of proves that to be true. Doesn't seem like the academic side's holding Freeman back from having the number one class. So bad excuse by Kelly already being disproven week by week, right? So listen, could we get a very pleasant surprise against Ohio State? Yes, we certainly could. But if we don't, I ain't going to go, this Freeman guy doesn't have it. I'm going to go, way to go, Kelly, for saddling this guy with not enough talent to compete against a top 3 program. That's the correct response. If things go bad against Ohio State, or even if we hang in there, lose by 10 points, 2 touchdowns, whatever, it ain't going to be me going, this Freeman guy, I don't know if he has what it takes to be head coach. No. I'm going to be going, thanks a lot, Kelly. Where's the elite quarterbacks? Why do we have 3 bodies in the wide receiver room? Huh? So you can't have it both ways, Notre Dame fans. I'm glad Brian Kelly's gone. He wasn't an elite recruiter. And also, Marcus needs to beat a top 3 team week 1, saddled with the exact problem that you just said you liked that sent the other guy away. Those are competing philosophical thoughts, folks. Think about it just in that little box. People have been saying, now that you're seeing the 23 class, the 24 class, I think now everybody's seeing what I thought was always possible. There was always a lot more meat on the recruiting bone at Notre Dame if the operation was run correctly with proper amounts of effort. It wasn't under Brian Kelly. So he's gone because of that. And now you want the other guy to just wave a wand and it's all gone week 1? All those problems, the reasons Kelly's not here, they can't all just be gone because the new guy's here. The roster's the roster till he has time to flip it. Not everywhere. The roster's not terrible, but flip it at the most important parts that are keeping us from winning playoff games. So those are competing thoughts to me. But for some reason, some people just don't seem to see that. You can't say on Twitter, oh man, I'm seeing what Freeman's doing in recruiting. It's night and day from Kelly. I'm glad he's gone. You know, this is such an upgrade. But then hold Freeman to the standards on the field of the talent of the other guy. You just said you were glad he's gone because it wasn't good enough. Those are competing philosophies. You cannot hold both at the same time. Illogical position. I am right in the middle. Hopeful that we shock the world somehow. Great vibe, great energy, good game plan, couple good breaks. Tyler Buckner shocks the world. We get a lot more production out of the wide receivers than many of us think you're going to get. Defense plays lights out, gets a couple turnovers. Notre Dame wins the game. I am perfectly open to that. I think that's a realistic scenario that could take place. No, I'm not going to bet money on Notre Dame to beat Ohio State, but it could certainly happen. There's enough talent on the team. It could happen for sure. It could. But if it doesn't, I ain't putting that on Freeman. He's saddled with a roster he didn't get to create. Some people are going to say, well, develop them. That's your job too. Get more out of them. That only works to a certain extent. And then it becomes an athletic talent depth issue. I always hear that. Coach up what you got. Make it better. Develop them. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, obviously that's a good idea for a head coach. Develop your talent. My response whenever somebody says that is, yeah, develop the talent. Develop 4- and 5-star talent into NFL players and college playoff game winners. I'd much rather do that than develop 3-star guys into decent college players. What do you think's a better path for everybody's success? Obviously, develop your guys. I'd rather develop 4- and 5-stars Marcus is recruiting into NFL players. Not develop all the Chicago Southside Catholic League guys like me that are 3-stars that love Notre Dame because we're Catholic, blah, 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 developing into being pretty good. No. Get guys that are better to begin with. And then as they get better, everything gets better. It ain't rocket science. But it is going to take 2 to 3 recruiting cycles to get this where Marcus wants it. Then I'll start judging him without Kelly's shadow hanging over all this. When it looks more like Marcus's vision. So obviously he's responsible for being a good steward of what he inherited, which is pretty good, but it ain't elite. And beating Ohio State takes an elite effort. Takes an elite effort to beat Ohio State. So I'm not saying what Freeman inherited is garbage, but it takes an elite effort to beat Ohio State, and that's what we're talking about. So I'm in the middle. Hopeful we shock the world, but also understanding we're in the infancy stages of rebuilding this program for what it's going to look like in its next iteration. And I got news for all of you. I got news for everybody here. You're not going to recognize this Notre Dame roster in about 2 to 3 years. You're not going to recognize it. And I mean that as the biggest compliment ever. You haven't seen anything like what this program and the talent's going to look at like in 2 to 3 years. So none of us are going to like if we don't beat Ohio State. Listening to the Big Ten people, Michigan people, they're all going to be riding us. Have the emotional football intelligence and maturity to know this isn't the finished product. This is not the finished product. We're still dealing with some of the irresponsible problems that have come from Brian Kelly's recruiting effort. We're still dealing with that. And it's getting better week by week. You got to give Marcus time to undo all the Brian Kelly-ness out of some of these roster positions. Then we're in it to win it. Okay? You're not going to recognize this roster in 2 to 3 years at all as being a typical Notre Dame roster. It's going to look way, way different. So don't judge this guy based on what he inherited from the last guy that wasn't good enough to the extent that he jumped and went somewhere else he thinks it's easier. Keep that in mind. All right? This roster is going to be something to behold in 2 to 3 years. Marcus going to get the last laugh here, even if he doesn't get the first one. Have a good day.